All right, for me, it's been 2 seconds, but welcome to my new video. We were just talking about intimacy, and we were talking about how Lear is discovering different forms of affection, love, um, uh, uh, limerence, let's say puppy love, but also, kind of incidental love that kind of accumulates over time because of a, proximity. So there's a lot of different things. I don't want to rehash it. It was in the last video I just finished. But we do talk about two different things in regards to that intimacy. Lear, he valued propriety and being polite. So when we talk about the consent issue that he had with Candle, there's the other side of that where he actually wanted to make love to Candle before he knew anything. And they actually describe him getting horned up, but he doesn't act on it because he didn't think it was appropriate, and he didn't have her consent, and he didn't want to kind of break that or cross that boundary. He didn't think it was appropriate. And so he chose the gentlemanly restraint and did not act on his actions. So then later on, it's a little bit more profound when, she says, by the way, we've got a baby coming. He's like, wait, that's impossible because I'm still a virgin. I've never had sex before. And you're telling me now that you're carrying my child. How is that possible? In the book, at the beginning, or when she first tells him, it just says that she explained where, when, and why, and how. That's it. And then you witness his, frankly, anger about what happened, and you come to realize it was without consent. And then, like I said in the last video, later on, Mother Yackel's explaining to the other Monts that, she, in order to save him, helped leech the juices out of him, the leech the evil out of him, which is really funny because going into, I think, Out of Oz, the fourth book, I've got it behind me. So Lion Among Men kind of takes place in tandem with Son of a Witch. And then Out of Oz is the story of Rain, the granddaughter of Elphaba, but Lear's daughter. But they say that Candle drew the evil from him in order to bring him back to life, or to wake him from his coma, which is kind of funny because we learn at the end of Son of a Witch that Rain, she's unnamed at the end of Son of a Witch, but we know her name becomes Rain because of the quote that's at the end, which actually I should find. But it's funny because she's born green. And he learns that after he washes her, after he realizes she's not just a dead baby. He notices that she's green, and that's interesting that Mother Yackel says that Candle leached the evil from him and then created a baby out of it. So again, we're talking about different themes, still related to Elphaba, kind of trying to bring it full circle. But also, the topic of consent and the topic of restraint or promiscuity, things like that. The Quadlings, they don't care, is what Candle is saying. And part of that could also be, he was shamed or felt, uncomfortable because of, societal pressure. Who knows? Next, we've got struggling to want to belong to something. So Lear doesn't really have a place in society, in a family, even in the military later in the book. He just doesn't feel like he fits in. And honestly, in a way, that's kind of that's thematic with the entire Throp family. Elphaba did not fit in whatsoever. We know why. Nessa Rose didn't fit in. She could have blended in if she wore like a shawl and they didn't see that she had no arms. But she also stuck out like a sore thumb. Shell is, while he very well could blend in, he didn't. And because of his personality, because of his relation to his sisters, or just, maybe he had a power of his own and it was charismatic in nature. They don't really talk about that. I'm speculating. So being one of the younger members of the family, Lear does not fit in. And so his self-imposed alienation from everybody else is kind of evident, that he's struggling with feeling like he should belong, or maybe that he doesn't even want to belong. But ultimately, that's the point of the story that Gregory Maguire was trying to get to, is that in order for him to have any power as a man, as a citizen, he's got to integrate himself into the society. He can't just stand on the outside, and that's important. And then he's also denying himself permission to belong, to love, to consider anything home. There's actually a story, and it's actually really sweet. When he goes back to Kyomoko the first time, Chisteri, in his old age, Nanny's also still alive, but like completely senile. But Chisteri says, until somebody comes and claims it, this is your home. Meaning that regardless of his relation to Elphaba, he is the inheritor of her legacy, meaning Kyomoko, but also of the broom and of her cloak, which, he also took the cloak. Which in a way, they kind of describe the cloak as having kind of magical qualities as well. But that's a very interesting thing, because saying he's the inheritor of the broom and the cloak, and we know he used the broom to get out of Southstair, and the cloak almost feels like a second skin to him. Like it protects him, it keeps him warm, it keeps him dry, because Elphaba was allergic to water. So we learn later that the broom doesn't work for anybody else. In the hands of a normal person, it's just a broom. But in the hands of Lear, it's Elphaba's broom. But going back to Kyomoko and what Chisteri says, this is your home. This is your house. It belongs to you. You're the man of the house now. And Lear doesn't want to accept that. He's like, I'll come back and visit you guys, but he's not giving him permission to plant roots, to land his, to rest his laurels. And it's because he doesn't feel worthy. He doesn't feel like there's any value that he offers to the legacy that he is being told that belongs to him. He doesn't feel like he deserves it, and he doesn't feel like he would do it justice. And then another part of it too, is that there's the burden of having to carry the torch that Elphaba had without her power. And that's something he struggles with the entire book. He's constantly saying, I'm not her. I don't have her power. And kind of what everybody says back to him is, we're not asking you to have her power. We're asking you to find your own. And that's ultimately what he needs to find, is what power he has, not hers. Because once he discovers his own talents, he can influence history instead of repeating it. He can create a future instead of just sitting in the same cycle of what happened before. He needs to make his own identity outside of Elphaba. Elphaba is just his history, his background. And they talk about him he has the power. I think it's the goose. There's a goose later, I forget his name. But the goose, or no, it's the eagle, the general at the Conference of Birds. One of them says that he has the power to read the past. Not to know the past like a history book, but to read the past, meaning to sense the intentions, to really to feel it, to feel the emotions and the purposes, and call it what you will, but he reads the past, whereas Candle reads the present. And then Elphaba was ultimately trying to read the future. And so, they're related, but they're different. They're sisters, not twins, eyebrow joke. But he needs to discover his own talent in order to create his own history instead of repeating Elphaba's. And he's so concerned about the pressure to be Elphaba that he forgets that he's not Elphaba and nobody needs him to be. And then when he does have those talents that present themselves, he denies them. He's either oblivious to them, or he does not want to believe that it's true, or that it's a figment of his imagination, or it's just coincidence. Well, If it's just a broom in the hands of anybody else, but you can fly on it, that's not coincidence. That is evidence of your power. And he kind of lives in denial of it, but he's riding around on a broom the whole time. Sometimes he does walk, but how can you ignore a major, major, major clue like that? You don't have green skin, but you can fly on a broom. And that you see him kind of evolve later into that role. We already talked about the forms of love and the nebulous nature of what it means to love somebody, but that's one of the main themes, is that he's trying to ask himself, what does it even mean to love and why is it necessary? And then ultimately he kind of lands on the idea that, home is where love is. Home is where the heart is. So the whole time, rather than Kiamoko, it's the apple press farm. Where Candle is, that's home. And ultimately that's where he sends Trism after the Monterey. That is, so to him, where his heart is where his home is. And so that's how he starts to understand why love is necessary, because it gives you a place to belong to yourself. We talk about in the book loyalty and obligation and expectation. He feels loyal to the memory of Elphaba and to what she stood for. He feels obligated to defend her honor, to correct people or to kind of chime in when he feels like they're saying something tongue-in-cheek that's unnecessary or hurtful or wrong. And people are oblivious to it because he's not going to outright say, hello, that's my mom, don't talk about her like that. He can't say those things, but he does feel obliged to kind of like do what he can to mitigate those kinds of comments or to remove himself from a situation that's making him feel uncomfortable because it's hurtful. He really does love Elphaba, and I think that's something that the book never really explores, but ultimately that's the whole point, is that he loved Elphaba, and it was an unspoken love that he can't define, and he doesn't want to, because that is terrifying. Because once he realizes he loves her, that means that he's lost her. And then it's about keeping promises too. He swore he would find Noor and he would bring her home. And he swore that he would help the Princess Nastoya find death because she's stuck in her human form and she can't die that way. She's like perpetually aging and rotting. But until she gets back into her animal form, she can't die. And he kind of like ignored her for like a decade, but ultimately he comes back and he fulfills that promise with the help of Candle and her Dominican, begrudgingly, with a baby in her belly. She's so mad. And then one of the final themes of the book that they really talk about, that you kind of get a sense for, is the danger of innocence, the risk or the threat of naivete. You cannot walk through life in ignorance because it's dangerous. Your life is in danger. Your way of life is in danger if you remain ignorant to the things that are happening around you, whether that's society, whether that's people bullying each other, whether that's, that's your body saying, hey, this hurts, you should have a doctor look at it. There are things that you cannot ignore, because if you do, they lead to worse things. And that's one of the things, is that you can't just sit in the background and just watch life unfold before you. You have to care for yourself. You have to care about those around you that you love. You have to decide you love them first. And if there's something that you said you want to do, or that you need to do, or that you feel obliged to do, shut up and do it. Candle actually had to force him out of the house. He was like, you know what? I'm happy. I got you. You saved me. You woke me up. I don't care about dragons. I don't care about these birds. I don't care about Elphaba's legacy. And she's like, you gotta go. You get out there, live your life, find yourself, and then you can come back here once you're a fully grown man. She didn't say that, but that's what she meant. But that's the thing, is like, if you sit there and live in your ignorance, you're creating for yourself a very dangerous situation. And that's what the book is saying, that you cannot you cannot contribute to society if you choose to sit outside of it. You have to become a part of it. And even though he lived his entire life with Elphaba outside of society, that ignorance kind of left him in a handicapped position where he was completely ignorant to the reality and the dangers of the world around him. And ultimately that put himself and the people around him that kind of relied on him in danger. And that's what he needed to learn in order to find his place and be there safely. But also to help bring a child into the world. Ultimately, that's, the end of the book is kind of guiding us down that path of, here's this man who has now lived a life comparable to Elphaba. And in a lot of ways, he grows to become worthy of her legacy again. And it's only when he finally realizes his flaws, the things that he did wrong, the things that he did right, and he's sitting in an empty farmhouse. No candle, no trism. He finished what he needed to do for Princess Nastoya. He finished what he needed to do for the birds. He came to an understanding of what happened to Nor. And they don't directly, say what happened to her, but it does, Princess Nastoya's final message to him, and we'll get to that in a moment. Things, the last part of this video is going to be things that gave me the chills. But one of those was, the Princess Nastoya's final words, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it gave him closure to his journey to finding Nor. Because the whole purpose of the Princess Nastoya plot arc was that he needed to help figure out how to give her death by helping this enchantment go away without the power that Elphaba had. He's like, how can I do magic when I don't have magic? And she's like, you figure it out, I'll figure out where Nor is. And so ultimately, that kind of comes full circle. And I'll give you the answer in a second. But, he's sitting in this house having finally a grown realization of who he is, why he is, where he comes from, and why he exists. And ultimately, that he's already accomplished what was expected of him by doing the journey. The journey was the purpose. And by completing that journey, he became the son of the witch. And there's a huge culmination of that. So I'll go into that section next. So this is the final section, I promise. But it's the moments in the book that gave me chills, things that really touched on my heart and like kind of gave me goosebumps or, made me kind of have like a nostalgic moment. But the first one is when he meets Shell the first time. Because he's having that inner dialogue about how he wanted so badly to identify himself as Elphaba's child, in the hopes maybe that Shell would be like, oh, you're my nephew, how cool. And so again, dramatic irony, we as the reader know the truth. And so I kind of like, it gave me chills to be like, oh my God, he's in this situation where he very well could spill the beans, but what purpose would that serve? And it's so cool, but it's also so very dark and like depressing that he can't say anything, but also at the same time, you completely understand why. And then the second time he meets Shell, or that he hears about Shell, is completely opposite, because we now learn that Shell has, oh my gosh, my dog, Shell has taken over from the strawman government and become the apostate emperor of the one true God, the spear of God, the first spear, with the dragons being the second spear. He ends up killing the dragons with the help of Trist, and that's why him and Trist run away. Or not Trist, again, Freudian slip. Trism. Trism is the Beastmaster who helped raise these dragons. And so that's another part that gave me chills, is that you realize Because he's like, where did the dragons come from? In the beginning, we don't know what knocked him off the broom, what was scraping the faces off the monks that are, you know, going around doing missionary work. We don't know what these mysterious, you know, antagonists are. It's not the birds. It's not the, you know, the Unamata, one of the tribes of the hinterlands, or of the Vinkus. I couldn't remember the word. You know, it's not one of the tribes of the Vinkus. It's not the birds. So who's scraping these faces? It's obviously something that flies. We learn it's the dragons. Well, where did the dragons come from? The only story we know of dragons is the clock of the time dragon, or the, you know, the creation myth of the time dragon itself that breathed life into the world. And so we learn that dragons are a real thing. Well, where did they come from? Well, if you recall from Wicked, Elphaba had a page of the Grimoire on her when she met that last time with the wizard, and he confiscated it from her and then demanded the rest of the book. He never got the rest of the book. We never see the rest of the book. And I have a feeling, I think they touch on it, but you don't really know. But they're, you know, I think the book is moving. It's going somewhere. Because they talk about a man with a ancient tome or something. I think it was at the beginning of the book, but they don't really flesh out that part of the story because I think it plays later on with one of the other stories. I think Out of Oz, maybe. So the Grimoire, he wants to know where the Grimoire is, but it says that it's you know, it's eluded him. Lear can't find it. Well, one of those pages was taken by the wizard at the end of Wicked from Elphaba, and it was How to Master Dragons. The wizard got that one page. Well, now the military force of the Emerald City has dragons. So like, it's like one of those like, oh wow, like click. And then there's a moment when he first goes back to Kiamoko, and he's actually trying to find the Grimoire, but he's looking around in Elphaba's room, and he finds a locked cupboard, and he finds the key. He opens up the cupboard, and there's only two things in it. A pair of boots, really nice men's boots. They were Fiyero's boots. And that, just him discovering that gave me like warm-hearted feeling. But then like coiled up in the boot was a drawing, and it was a drawing that Fiyero had done of Nor. And so he took the picture of Nor and put it in his pocket, took it with him. He tried to put on Fiyero's boots when he left, but then ultimately decided he was not worthy of them and didn't even know if Fiyero was his father, so he left them in the cupboard and locked it back up. And I thought that was such a beautiful touch. Like, he could have just taken them and we're like, oh yeah, so he's got his mom's broom and his dad's boots. But it's that feeling of not belonging or, you know, unworthiness. He put those back because he doesn't feel worthy of the legacy of Fiyero. He's already got the burden of Elphaba's legacy. So that, and I really think it was such a good touch to the story. It didn't need any more information. It served its purpose, and it gave you that warm but also like heartbreaking feeling. Oh gosh. All right. At the end of the book, towards the end, one of the realizations of him accepting that he is the son of the witch is when he agrees to fly with the birds. It's a military maneuver, sort of, but they have no strength of power. You know, they're not going to fight. It was just a demonstration of we're here, and all of the birds as a final, like, F you to this Emerald City, to the Emperor and everybody, is that out of the west comes a swarm of birds, but they make the shape of a witch flying as a black haze from the west at them. And then, you know, going over their heads and like making themselves present. It's basically like not saying as a threat, but like, hey, we are here. And, you know, there's some words that are scrawled out throughout the story that say Elphaba lives. And so this is such a cool element where you're like, oh my God, she exists, because they, like, not physically her herself, but the witch, the idea of the witch still lives. And here she is in the shape of millions of birds flying at the Emerald City. It would have been a sight. And at the center of it, her black eye is Lear on the broom, wearing her cape, intentionally needing to be seen. And that has such a very important point, because he is accepting that he is literally and figuratively a part of her legacy, a part of her body. He is he is her eyes into the future. It kind of ties back to Wicked, when Dorothy's coming up the steps to Yamako, Elphaba couldn't see into the looking glass, but Lear did. He was her eyes once before. And so here he is now, literally becoming her eye in this visage of the witch flying at the Emerald City well beyond her death. And that, he is her eye, meaning that she can see the future through him. He is the looking glass for Elphaba looking into the future. It's such a cool piece of the story. Like, he literally inherits and becomes her vision. Okay, now we get to the end result of Princess Nostoya's storyline. That gave me the chills, and I was like kind of hinting at it. But one of her final things was, she's already dead. But he's like, how can she tell me what happened to Nor if she's already dead? Well, she must have already told me. Well, her final words, her final message to Lear was the word on the street. He's like, well, what's the word on the street? And then he's like, oh shit. The word on the street was Elphaba lives. But in his pocket, he had a picture drawn by Fiyero of Nor. And on the back, in her handwriting, it said, a picture of Nor by Fiyero. The word on the street was in the same handwriting as the picture in his pocket the whole time. So he had clues that Nor was out there saying Elphaba lives. Literally, the word on the street. And when that part of the story kicks in, you're just like, oh, shit. Like, that's cool. And it was her final message. So she fulfilled her part of the promise. He helped her find death, and he helped her learn the whereabouts of Nor. I already talked about Chisri saying, and it gave that's another part that gave me chills. But when Chisri said that, until somebody claims that this is your home, like I'm like, I had a tear, because, Chisri was almost like looking at him like, you're the new lord. Almost in reverence, like a family member, like brothers, honestly, like brothers. And then there's Glinda, of course. When she does meet up with him again later in the story, when they're at the Monterey and there's a siege. The soldiers know that Trism and Lear are there, seeking asylum, and the Monts are like, well, we're gonna break from tradition. We're no longer letting people in, because we have to protect these boys. So we need to stand up to them. And Glinda's basically like, well, they won't come in and they won't attack you while I'm in here. So she makes herself known. She was just there visiting just by coincidence. Is it really? But she has this interaction with Lear, and me as the reader, I wanted to hear her recognize that Lear was Elphaba's child. And while she doesn't directly say it, and while he doesn't directly claim it, part of their discussion is her saying, I hear this tone of defiance in your voice, and that is proof enough that I need to know that you are the kin of my friend. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, she wants it to be true. She thinks it's true, but she doesn't have confirmation. But at the same time, she's literally looking him in the eye going, I don't care. I see Elphie in your face, and she's here, and that's all I need. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and I'm getting teary now too. It's such a cool moment to see that interaction. Now, knowing the Broadway musical and the relationship between Elphaba and Glinda in that, because it's such a huge, like it's the primary plot, but not so much in the book. So kind of I'm in my brain, I'm combining them into one universe. So, you know, kind of I'm hearing Kristen Chenoweth saying, you know, oh, my Elphie, you know, like I'm picturing that in my head, and that totally made me want to cry. They also do some slight nods. So Son of a Witch came out after the Broadway musical. So there's a lot of little subtle things in there, but one of the coolest parts is there's a part where Glinda's talking about Elphaba to Lear, and she goes, "Oh, sweet Oz!" And it's like, I mean, that's literally what she says in the play. So, and that was Gregory Maguire tipping his hat to Stephen Schwartz and the musical. But she also she contradicts Lear when he, I forget what the actual discussion was, but he's like, she has, you know, people think the wrong things about her. And she goes, no, 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 no. And the actual quote is, she lives. People sing of her. There's a musical noise around her name. There are things people remember and pass on. And what that means is that while Elphaba was wicked at the time, history has continued, and people saw what the wizard was and what the government was and what the emperors became after the wizard. Their ignorance didn't last. And so even though she's dead, they started to realize, oh, she had a point. So while the tragedy of the lives and times of the Witch of the West ended with her death, we get the resolution of her unfinished story in the satisfaction of knowing that everything she fought for was worth it. And that's the cool thing about having the story. Like, we get the resolution. We had the loose ends and then the resolution. And knowing that she accepted that title of being called wicked, and it was worth it. It was worth it. And that just brings me back to the quote of what Galinda says in the Broadway musical to open it. Are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? After all, she had a mother, she had a father, as so many do. And it's just so interesting to take that thought and apply it to the books, because that's the point. That's why it's called Wicked. That's why she's the Wicked Witch of the West. It's a revisionist narrative that, you know, it's giving us this insight into a fictional character that we've always known as Wicked, you know, Wicked Witch, you know, from the original films. And being able to think about that concept, many of us in our lives have had, let's say, rumors or doubts or perceptions about us that we didn't like, or that we couldn't control, or, you know, that we wanted to control, but it was out of our power. And that's the point. Sometimes you just have to accept that you have no control over what people say and just live your life. Stand up for what you believe in, and don't worry about what people say. What they say may not be positive, but you're doing the right thing. Worry about you. Don't worry about them. And just knowing that Glinda is the one that is sharing with Lear that people got it. My friend made a difference. And even though it was surreptitious and subliminal and behind the scenes and you know, mostly unknown, it was worth it. And that's your mama. And that's what Glinda was saying to him. So anyhow, we're at a half hour, 35 minutes now. I'm going to stop there. Read the book. It's so good. Listen to the audiobooks if you want. Gregory Maguire actually is the one that did the reading for it. So you hear it in his own voice. Whereas Lion Among Men and Wicked are done by other non-Gregory Maguire actors. I don't remember their names. Thank you so much for listening to this. Son of a Witch is an amazing book. I'm going to be doing Lion Among Men next. I've already purchased the audiobook. I've already hit play. So look for that one coming out in the future. And then the whole point of me rereading these is because I didn't know that there was a fourth book, because I'm a baddie. And so there is... Oh, sorry, girls. Oh, there is... it's hard to see there. Out of Oz. So this is the fourth book that I didn't even know existed. And it's the story of the baby girl. And so at the end of Son of a Witch, Candle is gone. The goose is gone. The goose claims to be his familiar, or calls himself his familiar. And Lear's like, I'm not a witch. And he's like, well, I think you are, so cool. Anyway, he's left. He's abandoned. We don't know the whereabouts. There's a hint that the Monts have elected Candle to be one of a trifecta of leaders, no longer having the Mother Mont, but having instead three, the Mother Mont, Mother Doctor, or Sister Doctor, and Candle as the third, to make the decisions moving forward with the Montery. It's a part of the story. I'm not going to explain it. But anyway, we assume that's where Candle might have gone, but we don't ultimately know. Lear walks into the house. There's a bundle inside of Elphaba's cape, and to him, it's a corpse. He had just milked the goat because the goat was really pissed off that she hadn't been milked. And he, tried to twist, he put some of the milk through a cheesecloth into the baby, and the baby came to life. She wasn't actually dead. And so, he kind of warmed her up, kind of reminiscing on that memory he had of Elphaba pushing the cradle with presumably him in it when he was a baby. And it's kind of coming full circle. Now he's going to provide that same assistance to this baby. And then I'm not sure if I can find it, but there is a quote that came at the end of the book where, I'm not going to find it, but there's a quote that he closed out with that basically said, let the rain of voices of the people of the future, I don't know, something, but it has a reference to rain. And so ultimately I think that became like the hint that the granddaughter of the witch, we discover she is green after he sees her in the firelight. The granddaughter of the witch, who is pictured here, and the primary character of Out of Oz, is the green girl named Rain, and she is the granddaughter. She is the inheritor of the legacy of now Elphaba and Lear and Fiyero and Nor and all of them. Like I said, I haven't read it. I'm excited for it. Stay tuned for Lion Among Men, and thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you, and like, subscribe, share, whatever. I love it. Bye.